Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. It's a Sunday night, which means I'm joined by Kevin Flaherty. We're here to break down Kansas football's 16-13 loss to Texas Tech at David Booth, Kansas Memorial Stadium. Kevin, you were there. You witnessed a Big Ten game in person at long last at the booth. The penultimate home game.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
This next week against K-State will be the final home game of this rendition of the David Booth, Kansas Memorial Stadium. But Kevin, for you watching this game in person, man, this was an ugly one. Being in the press box, like it didn't seem like the crowd was able to really get into it, and that's as a result of KU's slow start. But taking this in from the stands, what'd you think?
It's funny because I actually thought a lot of the slowness happened even before the game started.
Mm,
When arriving for the game, pulling up to get a parking spot and everything, it was like a ghost town. There weren't a lot of people out and around, and I know that we usually get there a little bit early, but everything seemed like it was about 30 minutes slower than it normally would be. And I've been to morning games before and everything, and where that hasn't necessarily been the case, but it just felt like if you felt like this many fans were going to be out on the hill at 9 o'clock, normally like that was the amount of fans that were there at 9:30 or 10 o'clock.
mm,
And so everything just felt a little bit slower. And I think when you looked at the stands probably before the game, you noticed that it was a late arriving crowd, and in some cases, the student section didn't fill all the way up to the top in that corner. And I'm not blaming the students. I'm just saying it was kind of like that all the way through, right? It was
mm.
kind of a slow, not super energetic. And then with the way the game started, with Texas Tech taking the lead, with Jason Bean getting hurt and all the different things, and it felt like there was just a real sluggish energy kind of throughout the stadium. Is that what you picked up in
Yeah.
the press box too?
I mean, yeah, I was talking to someone pregame, and I'm like, I just get bad vibes from it. And maybe it was the
Yeah.
David Beatty uniforms that KU was wearing. I don't know, like that was uniforms don't dictate, right, the result. But I'll tell you what, Lance Leipold going on Hawk Talk, his the weekly radio show, right, and saying basically talking about favorite uniform combinations with Quentin Skinner, and they basically agreed, you look good, um, feel good, play good. And I looked at the uniforms. I'm like, oh, these are like 2015, 2016 Kansas type of uniforms. And so, look, that doesn't change anything. But it was just one of these games where from the start, you're kind of like, ooh, this feels like what, when you hear Texas and Oklahoma fans, right, complain about 11 a.m. kicks and all this stuff, like that's what it felt like. We're
Yeah.
just the home team was kind of asleep, and the road team's like, great, we got to play a game. We're up, we're ready, and they were ready to go. And Texas Tech just punched KU in the mouth. Right? You look at KU going 3-and-out on the first drive. Damon Greaves, his punt gets caught up in the wind. It's not good. Texas Tech starts at the 50. Like it's just a recipe for a tough time, tough sledding early on. And I feel like it just took a while for KU to get in it. And I don't know if the offense really ever did get fully in it until maybe the fourth quarter. So
Yeah.
it's just one of these games where I think there always going to be a game like this over the course of the season. I think you could easily look at the Iowa State game last year and say it was very similar, right? 11 a.m. game, really struggles for both teams, not a lot of crisp play out there. And I think this is kind of the first time this season, at least at home, that you can say, hey, man, Kansas just did not come to play in the first like 30 minutes of real human being time and probably the first, 4 drives of the game. And it's just, it's one of those where you kind of got to look back and say, all right, is this a player thing? Is it a coach thing? Is it an environment thing? Like, it's not to sound like Lance Leipold, but you got to go back and evaluate it all because it was just such
Sure.
a weird start to the game.
And I know we try and keep basketball separate from this, but I
Mhm.
think it's important to kind of draw this distinction. At Allen Fieldhouse, how many times have you seen sort of a lazy Saturday game? The team just really comes out kind of sluggish, and the fans almost generate the
Mm,
energy for that team, right?
yeah.
They're there, and it may only be a couple buckets or like a bucket and a forced turnover or something, but the 16,300, they're on their feet and everything, and they're almost like willing the team to win. I feel like in football, it's a lot more cyclical relationship, right? Where the fans are kind of like, well, when are you going to make a play to get me out of my seat and get the energy going?
Yeah.
And the players are thinking, man, it'd be easier to make a play and get the energy going
Yeah.
if you were up and giving me that energy. And so it was kind of this cyclical thing on, like you said, just kind of a quiet, sluggish, Saturday. And, we can go through, and I'm sure we will, and point to this turning point or that turning point or different things like that. I think the very first turning point is you come out, you go down 10-0. You don't have that happen if you come out and just play Texas Tech even through that time period, even with things being a little bit sluggish, a little bit off or whatever.
Yeah.
And we're probably sitting here talking about a win right now.
Totally. Well, look, I think through the first two drives, I'm thinking, oh boy, like this feels like 2021, the rut in 2022 for the defense,
Yeah.
right? Taj Brooks is running all over the place. KU's defensive line's getting pushed off the ball. The linebackers are slow to get to gaps. And it wasn't even like guys were missing tackles, Kevin. Like Taj Brooks was just getting 7 yards before he had anybody hit him.
Yep.
And that was super like smashing panic button type of performance from the defense. And the offense wasn't much better, right? There was not much of a crisp feel offensively, right? Jason Bean did not start the game well. The offensive line did not start the game well, run blocking.
Yep.
And, but then, right, I think you look at the defense and they when they stopped having to face kind of a long or a short field, right? Texas Tech started their first drive at the 50, their second drive at the 45. And then after that, it was more normal territory to start. Not KU's defense was much better. Kevin, my favorite stat from the game, and we can get into what changed, but Lance Leipold hinted at this post game. But so you take the first two drives and you take the last drive, right? You take that out. Texas Tech averaged 1.5 yards per play outside of that.
Yep.
Right? I think it's like 8 drives or so. Like
Sure.
they stunk. And it's because of KU's defense because they figured it out. And this is one of those games where we can get into this quarterback conversation now, but if you had a starting quarterback, whether that be Jason Bean, Jalen Daniels, if you have your starter for the whole game, this is a game Kansas figures out a way to win. Right?
Yep.
And because you're asking a freshman walk-on to figure it out on the fly, there's too big of a lull where it's like figuring it out. And, when Jason Bean goes down, like automatically it's like, this is bad. And I don't know about you, Kevin, but when that injury first happened, I thought we were going to be headed for a blowout. Because at that point in time, right, KU's defense, I believe, had just gotten their first stop. KU's offense had been slow, and then Jason makes a really good play on the run. The type of play you're thinking for the last couple of weeks, like, Jason has not run the ball very much. And then he runs it like that and takes a walloping from 2 Texas Tech guys and gets hurt. From like, what was the vibe in the stands? Like, what were you worried about as soon as that happened? Because I think for me, I was like, oh boy, that did not look good because his legs bent a different way. You see the head come together with the 2 guys. Like, it just did not look good right off the bat.
In the stands, we were wondering almost if it was a knee or a hip or something like that because of the way he got kind of twisted up in that instance. And so, when that happens, you're not usually thinking you're going to see the guy again. And so, it's obviously, Jalen standing there in street clothes, and not going through warmups. You knew, it's not like Jalen was going to be like, hold on, like I'm actually good, coach. Let me run in, grab my gear, and I'll be back out. And so you start thinking about, how you're going to triage this, right? How you're going to survive it. Are you going to how are you going to move the ball? And at that point, it was a very real question because Kansas wasn't running the ball well. They weren't getting hat on hat. They weren't generating movement in the running game. And normally, I think with the way Kansas runs the ball, you'd maybe feel a little bit better about it, right? Like, because you'd say, well, okay, yes, Ballard's in the game, but Kansas is going to be able to line up and maybe run this ball a little bit, make life a little bit easier for him. But when you're not running the ball already, and then
Mhm.
you have him come in, I think there's a real I don't want to say fear, but maybe apprehension in terms of saying, okay, where's the movement going to come from now? Is this going to be the sort of thing that's going to get out of hand? And
Yeah.
I just I know that they had the rough start. I know that they gave up the game winning drive, etc. I can't say enough about the Kansas defense and the performance that they had in that game, and a lot of it, to be frank with you, was willpower because
Mm.
Texas Tech was lining up and saying we are going to run the ball over you. You need to line up and get those pads popping, and you need to stop us. And in the second half, even when you take out the sack yardage that Morton lost, Texas Tech carried the ball 16 times for 46 yards. That's 2.9 yards a carry. And
Mhm.
Tech has a pretty big and pretty solid offensive line. They've got a really good running back in Taj Brooks, and Kansas really, sort of manned up and took care of that situation. And without the defense stepping up the way that it did, this game
Mhm.
really would have gotten out of hand, I think, and would have been significantly worse. Of course, that doesn't make it any less heartbreaking, the fact that Kansas was able to come back, but the fact that they were able to come back, I do think is kind of a testament to the fight that defensive group has, and that's something that group has shown, the
Mm.
last few weeks. When you look at the timely stops against Oklahoma, when you look at the stops that they were able to generate in key moments against Iowa State, and for most of that game, quite frankly, and then what they were able to do for most of the game against Texas
Mhm.
Tech.
Yeah, you're right, Kevin. Like, this is a defense that I think just continues to get better, right?
Yeah,
I think if you look at last season, and obviously it wasn't great at the back end of the season, but you look at what this unit has been with a defensive line that fits what KU wants to do. And it's not been perfect, right? There have been games where KU's defensive line will get pushed around for a little bit, but it's those games have become more few and far between. Where last year was the opposite, where it was kind of like few and far between that KU's defensive line held its own. And you look at what this unit did, right? Jeremy Robinson's banged up. Austin Booker's still wearing the brace on his knee. Devin Phillips wasn't even dressed to play. Tommy
yeah,
Dunn came back after not playing last week. Keenan Caldwell gets hurt during the game. So you're really looking at Gage Keys, DJ Withers, and Caleb Taylor as kind of the three guys that have been mainstays. And they're three guys that at the beginning of the season, you're thinking, okay, you know, good players like DJ and Gage need time to learn. Caleb Taylor, you kind of know what he is at this point. And those guys have really stepped up. And you look at Hayden Hatcher bringing you good snaps from defensive end. And I think the defensive line, them being able to turn it around and put their foot in the dirt and stop Texas Tech's offensive line from moving them is a huge reason why this is even a game,
yeah,
right? Because you look at what Texas Tech has done, like they've put up points. It's almost been a question of, okay, can Texas Tech's offense not turn the ball over? But they've been able to put up points against a lot of teams, and for KU to hold them to 16 points, I think is really impressive. And let's save the final drive for later, because I think we have a whole conversation to have about the final 45, 50 seconds.
sure,
But Cole Ballard, right? So as soon as the injury happens to Jason, it's the end of the first quarter. And it felt like to me that was like not the perfect time, but if an injury is going to happen, you want it to happen at the end of a quarter, where
yeah,
you've got kind of that 3 to 4 minute break where the guy can kind of get treatment. They can figure out, okay, what do we need to do? And then Jason comes back in the game. And then there's the fourth down play, Kevin, and I want to get your opinion here, where they've got a lot of people going to the right. Jason goes to the left with one of the skill position guys, and he gets tackled. And that's where the second injury happens, which Lance Leipold has said is a head injury. My perspective is that, hey, you just had this guy get hurt 3 plays ago,
yeah,
and we're gonna roll him out on like a naked bootleg. I just, for me, like, I just don't know. That didn't feel like the right time to run that play when your guy just got his bell rung and his knee twisted. What'd you think of that play? And I know you've been able to go back and look at some of this stuff, but like, what do you
Yeah.
think of that spot on a 4th down to call that?
Yeah, I thought it was odd timing to be sure, and it's kind of I don't want to say funny, but when you're up in the press box, for those who haven't been in that situation or whatever, you're thinking about storylines, right? Like as a game goes on, and you're thinking, a lot of times you're starting to write your article, you're writing about different parts of the game that have happened already, and you're also thinking about where am I going to take this? What's going to be sort of the theme, the lead, the different things like that. You're writing the article there. I knew we'd be talking about it today, and so after being second injury, I'm in the stands thinking, okay, two things. I was like, Devin Phillips not being there really showed up early because I
Mhm.
thought Devin Phillips is their best run defending defensive
Yeah.
tackle. He's the guy that kind of helps make that group solid. And at that point, Tech was running the ball all over Kansas. And then the second part was, the injury to Bean and everything else. And, look, we talk all the time about Jalen being hurt and
Mhm.
Kansas not having access to Jalen. And I think, the bigger thing at this point, it's not Jason Bean's played well enough. I'm not saying there's not a drop off from Jalen to Jason Bean because we've talked about that and there is, but the bigger drop off is from Jason Bean to Cole Ballard as your number 1 and 2 versus the drop off from Jalen
Mm.
to Jason Bean. And so at that point, the timing did surprise me a little bit. At the same time, it is football. Sometimes these things just happen. A guy just takes a hit or whatever else. And I thought, there were a lot of comments online about Tech being dirty or whatever else. Tech's a physical team, and I don't. I'm not comfortable, throwing around any sort of labels or things like that. I think that it was
Mhm.
just that, hey, if they had a chance to make a physical tackle or a physical play, they were going to make that physical play. And so when Bean went out the second time, you started to feel like, oh, okay, like it's really Cole Ballard now, like
Yeah.
for better or worse. It's Jason Bean's not going to pull a Willis Reed and come limping back out and do this thing.
Mhm.
It's going to be Cole Ballard, and either you're going to win or you're going to lose this game with Cole Ballard on the football field.
Totally, right, and there's a moment where Jason Bean goes back to the locker room, and anytime that happens, that's
Yeah.
immediate when you're like, "Okay, this is" like, in my head, you're right, you mentioned what did you go through in the press box, like, for me, I'm like, "Okay, time to write the story that Jason Bean has just left this game."
Yeah.
And it's Cole Ballard time, and you gotta focus on that for a minute, but it felt like too, it took a minute for Ballard to get into rhythm. I felt like the first
Yeah.
drive, right, that long drive where it was like 18 plays, that was like one portion of the Cole Ballard experience for me, where it was him getting comfortable, right? Some run plays early, but then he makes a really good throw. And then all of a sudden, as that drive progresses, right? Then all of a sudden, there's that play to Torrey Laughlin, right? Where I think that was a really good play call from
Yeah.
Andy Kotelnicki, right? Where it looks like Laughlin, the gadget guy, is going to go block on the edge for a run play. And all of a sudden, he's 20 yards downfield, and Cole Ballard's able to make a good throw. So I feel like that drive to me was like its own thing in this Cole Ballard experience that we got on Saturday. Um, and then they get inside the red zone. And this is where I'm going to pull up some of the red zone stats for the entire game, because I think we could probably just talk about this broadly right
Sure.
now. Like, KU was not good enough in the red zone, and specifically in goal to go situations, right? I
Yep.
pulled up a tweet for our YouTube audience from Shane Jackson, who does some freelance work for the Lawrence Journal World. He also does some really good betting content if you're into that stuff. But basically, the tweet is like, Kansas ran 10 plays in goal to go situations against Texas Tech. KU had a net gain of 12 yards on those 10 snaps. It just was not good enough. You look at the actual play calls, right? KU threw the ball 3 times. One
Yep.
of those passes was Devin Neal, which I want to have a whole separate conversation about later.
Sure.
One of those was a pop pass to Tanaka Scott. That was a bad play from Cole Ballard. That's one of those where it's kind of the guy's got adrenaline pumping. A pop pass is maybe not the best thing to do for your freshman quarterback who is in the red zone for the first time in his college career, right? And then the other one was an actual just drop back pass, So really, it's one actual passing play and then 7 runs and 2 kind of gimmicky stuff. Like, I just felt like this is a game that was defined by the goal to go situations,
Yep.
because you're looking at this and saying Kansas had all these plays, and think about the points they left up on the board, right? The one touchdown they scored is from 60 yards away, right? Imagine if they're able to convert on, 1 or 2 of these, all of a sudden you're turning a field goal into 4 more points. You're looking at a win for Kansas, right?
Yep.
So for me, it just felt like this was a game where the play calling and the execution and the goal to go situations was so far off and nowhere close to what it should be.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm glad you put it that way because I think, at least in the stands, there was an overwhelming feeling of it's the play calling, it's the play calling, it's the play calling. And I actually tweeted out a link to the fun play where Andy Kotelnicki had Armaje Reed Adams playing in the slot and motioned him over to block a guy. And a lot of the comments on that post were, well, where was this in the red zone? Or different things like that. And, for one thing, you're not as spread out in the red zone. So some things like that, might not have the same impact or whatever else. But you said play calling and execution. And I think it's important to phrase it that way because, you know, like for instance, the 4th and 1, Daniel Highshaw rushes middle for -5 yards. That was a blown block. I mean, if you can say what you want about, hey, why don't we do something more creative than just run the ball up the middle or whatever? I mean, I'd be willing to listen to that, but you're lining up and you're running the ball up the middle, and Kansas let a linebacker come through the A gap and blow the entire thing up. And when you look at that, and talking to different coaches about, your technique when you're in close and short yardage situations and everything, you're talking foot to foot, you're talking wedge blocking, different things like that, so that guy doesn't get through. And if Kansas gets a hat on a hat there, Daniel Highshaw might score. And it's not a bad play call. It's a run up the middle. It's not complicated. But at the same time, there was a lack of execution in that. I know you and I disagree a little bit about the little pop pass action
Yeah,
to Tanaka Scott in terms of, hey, if it had been executed, what would have happened there? I think if Tanaka Scott would have caught that cleanly, there's a chance for something. You point out accurately that there was a Texas Tech defender in that area who might have made a play.
yeah,
But again, I'm not saying it was a perfect play call, but again, the execution was lacking. On
totally.
the QB draw was executed pretty well, and you got the 4 yards to get into the 3. The Daniel Highshaw run for 8 yards, you executed it well, and if he breaks the tackle or, just pushes that guy a little more, he's in the end zone. And so it's not straight up saying, hey, on each of these 10 snaps, this was the issue each time, because there were a couple plays there that were successful.
Yeah,
There were some plays there where, hey, the play call probably wasn't the best.
yeah,
And there were a few plays there where Kansas's players didn't execute. It was a combination of all those different things. And like you said, the end result was just not good enough. You had all those red zone trips and you get 6 points out of it total coming off of 2 field goals. And so that that's where this game probably was won or lost, quite frankly.
totally. Yeah, and for me, so I look at this. I look at it this way, Kevin. So I think my biggest issue probably comes with the 3 Daniel Highshaw runs, and not
Yeah,
the fact that Daniel Highshaw is running the ball. It is the fact that you're doing 3 runs in a row,
yeah,
right? And my issue also comes in the fact that you're running up the middle at the 1 and your center is limping all game. Like, what? Why? So that for me is where kind of my big issue with this is saying, your center's not 100%, and we're going to try and run the ball up the middle. back-to-back plays, like when it feels like that's kind of obvious. And so that for me is like, and it's a catch-22, right, Kevin? Because guess what? If they tried something different, I'm sure people would say, oh, well, why didn't you try to run up the middle?
Yep,
You
you
know,
run the ball to the outside, guy gets cut down for a 3-yard loss. They say, "Why are you going to the outside when you can go
you
up the
know,
middle?"
right. And it's like, it's
Or
same
a
thing with
pass
the people
player
saying,
or whatever
yeah,
else.
it's like under center, right? It's like, why don't they go under center? Well, because they never do it. And guess what
Yeah,
you're not going to do is put your freshman quarterback under center in college for the first time when he probably didn't even take under center snaps in high school.
I thought it
So
was super interesting.
mhm,
You know, I'd want to go back through and watch every Ballard snap and every Bean snap and see if it was an overall game plan thing. But Ballard was in pistol a ton. And
mm,
so that was very interesting to me. Like the fact that, and I'm not saying Bean's never in pistol, but I am saying I wonder if that was an adjustment to the offense's struggles to that point,
mm.
or if that was an adjustment to, hey, Cole Ballard is more comfortable operating out of the pistol than anything else. We're going to run more pistol with Cole Ballard because I thought that was kind of an interesting deal. The
Yeah,
other
that could
thing,
be. Mm,
and when we were looking at that, the Cole Ballard pass, where he got hit before he could really get the ball out,
mhm,
was a shame because Kansas had 6 blockers for 6 rushers. And, you know, if Cole Ballard makes the quick decision, it's probably going to Doug Emilion. I don't think that he gets in with the guys. Tech kind of had guys sitting at the goal line right about there. I think where he wanted to go or needed to go was to Lawrence Arnold over the top. And I think that he just needed an extra second and he just didn't get it from the protection.
yeah, and so I think from it's so red zone's so fascinating, especially when you have a situation like this, because you can always make an argument for and against these things, right? And I could go on and
Sure.
make a really good argument for Andy Koldenek here and say, hey, look, you know, Cole Ballard's a freshman. Do we want him processing things in the blink of an eye at the goal line? Or do we want to try and put the ball in the hands of our experienced players? And again, I'd say, hey, man, yeah, you haven't really run the ball great, in the first half.
Sure.
So we're gonna try and hammer that away. Oh, all right. But it's just for me is like one of these deals where you put it all together and it's not good enough, right? And the execution, and I think there's not one person specifically to blame for this stuff, right? It is a
Yeah,
collective,
you can spread this all over the place. Yeah.
totally. And look, Cole Ballard also did not get any help.
Yeah.
Let's be real here. Number 3 had a terrible game, right? You look at the drops he had in the fourth quarter. You're looking at a drive Kansas punted. He drops a 25-yard gain. Uh, on, I believe it was the one where they had the final field goal. He
Yeah.
drops one that Lawrence Arnold thankfully makes up for on the next play with the same exact concept. And then I think there's also the Jared Casey play where
Yeah,
he had a
I was
nice little
wondering
floated
if
throw.
you were gonna bring that up because that was he put that ball about as, in about as perfect a spot
Yeah.
as you could put it, and, I even hesitate to blame Jared Casey on it because I think just kinda natural motion of bringing the ball down, the guy's right there. I think it was kind of a fluky play, and
Mhm.
so it's one of those things where, more blame would go to Jared Casey than would go to Ballard in that circumstance. But even then, I think it was just kind of one of those really weird
Mhm.
things that kind of, as he caught it and brought it down, he basically brought it down into the Texas Tech guy's hands. Like it was just one of those really weird things. But that ball couldn't have been placed any better. And
No,
he got an interception for it. Yeah.
exactly. And so I think this is a game where just generally, like, it's like what could go wrong for Kansas offensively did go wrong. And so let's talk about the Devin Neal throw,
Okay.
because I think if you're not on Twitter, and I think the tweet got deleted pretty quickly, Devin Neal's father showed his not a fan of the call. Not a fan of the call. I think it says a lot that the player who was put in that position to make that play, their own dad saying, I don't like that. And that to me was just a what? And for me, Kevin, like the red flag went up in my head as the play's unfolding when you see a wildcat look with Torrey Loughlin back there, right?
Yeah.
Because for so often it's been, hey, Dylan McDuffie, it's been Daniel Highshaw back there, right? You could do handoffs. Which way is it going to go? Torrey Loughlin's not taking the handoff. And that immediately, for me, I'm sitting there like, oh, this is something weird's going on here. And what do you think Texas Tech's thinking? Because the Wildcat stuff's been on tape now for this is the third game, but for 2 games
Yeah.
previous. And so if you're going to give them a new look all of a sudden with the guy you're not thinking is going to get the ball, something's up. And so for me, I just thought in that play, I'm like, this is the time. And so it's kind of the same theme for me, where I just am like, time and place was at the right spot. I don't know.
I'm also in a spot. I'm not playing, and I realize they threw the ball into the end zone, so I'm not saying that they were playing for a tie. But like for me, I would have gone both downs for the touchdown there.
That's a
Because
good.
I'll be honest with you, this is not against Cole Ballard specifically, but given Kansas's issues in the red zone up to that point, I did not want to go to overtime where you're going to be in the red zone over and over again against another team. I did not trust that Kansas is going to consistently get touchdowns out of red zone play after not doing it all game. And so I was going into that third down play saying, run it twice. Third down, fourth down, run it twice. If you get in, you win the game probably. And if you get in, you go up by 4. A field goal doesn't tie it for Texas Tech. They need a touchdown over those final 45 seconds. And I get that this is coming across as, Monday morning or Sunday night in this case, quarterbacking. But that's what I was thinking at the time. I was thinking, hey, third down, I was thinking, run this ball twice. And I actually was very for them operating out of the Wildcat in that circumstance because I thought they'd had some success with it. And so I was thinking put Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw back there, run the Wildcat with the two of them, do it twice. And if you get in, you probably win the football game. If you don't, you don't. But, that was kind of my take on it. I think one of the Texas Tech defenders made a really nice play, on that. He saw running back sneaking behind him and kind of turned with it, which meant that Devin had to lob the ball a little more, and that allowed another defender to come over and break that thing up. But yeah, my thought was at that point was, yes, you could tie and send this thing into overtime, but remember too, a pass stopped the clock, and Texas Tech had just called a timeout on second down. Texas Tech was already knowing that it was that indicated everything to me because it said that Texas Tech is going for the winning field goal if you kick the tying field goal here because they're stopping the clock. And so to me at that point, I would have said, damn the torpedoes, as long as you didn't, get tackled for like a 5-yard loss or whatever. But basically 2 runs get 2 yards or 2 runs to get 3 yards and let the chips fall where they may. What do you think?
Yeah. And I think too, right. It's all running to the short side of the field with Jared Casey.
That was the other problem that I had was if you're going to run that pass off the Wildcat, give him some area to throw the ball into because he's not a quarterback. And so you're not trying to pinch the ball into a small area. You want to give him an area where he doesn't have to be inch perfect with the throw to complete it.
Yeah, and also maybe don't throw it to, Jared Casey, who's my height, or shorter, And this is one of those times where you're thinking, man, if they had Trevor Cardale healthy, this would have been the perfect Trevor, not that play call, but saying like, if you're going to try a pop pass into the end zone like that, even with Cole Ballard, you want someone like Trevor Cardale or Mason Fairchild out there who's a bigger target who can do it. And, it's just, I agree, Kevin, though. I think I understand why they went for the field goal.
Yeah.
Sure points. You're thinking the defense has been freaking killing it for 55 minutes, for 50 minutes. Like in Lance's head, I'm sure he's thinking, oh, we got this.
Well, and
right?
especially after the incompletion. Like, after that, yeah, I would have kicked the field goal after the incompletion.
Exactly, and that's the thing too, right? It's kind of like a momentum,
Yeah,
right? Where if you throw the completion, that's a stop, that's a reset. Where you run the ball, you can decide you want to go fast. Even though I have a disdain for the sugar huddle, you can make that decision. Do you want to go fast? How do you want to play this? Where incompletion, it's kind of like a more of a set stop.
yeah,
So for me, it's just one of those. Again, a lot had to go wrong for the Kansas offense to score 13 points in this game.
yeah,
You know, that's kind of what it comes down to. And a lot went wrong. And again, that's just kind of on everybody.
yeah. It is.
So,
It is.
what do you think about the last defensive drive then? Because for me, I
Way too
immediately got
soft to
Oklahoma
start
vibes.
off. Way too soft a coverage to start
Mhm.
off, and, it was one of those things where I felt like all game long, Kansas's DBs had done a great job, of sticking to Texas Tech's wide receivers, and that's a good wide receiving group. And so, I had felt like, play them straight up. You haven't been getting beat over the top. You haven't, and obviously they wound up getting beat over the top late. But at
Mhm.
the same time, I thought they gave up two really easy completions that, moved the ball down the field and put Tech into a great spot. And then, the final completion kind of was what it was, but I felt like it was almost already decided at that point by those two easy completions you gave up by playing really soft. What did you think?
Yeah, I thought Oklahoma.
Yeah,
That's exactly what I thought of, right? There's the play. It's the exact same thing. It's a throw to the right sideline, and it's a guy where is there a push off? I don't know, maybe. Like, I'm sure you can make the argument, yeah, did he get pushed off? Maybe, but in that moment, like the officials probably aren't going to call that.
sure.
And so it's just one of those where it just felt like kind of Oklahoma, and like you hit the nail on the head, Kevin. They needed a field goal instead of a touchdown. And Oklahoma needed a touchdown, so they had to go for that final shot at the end zone. They couldn't get it.
Yep.
Where this time they got this basically the same yardage as Oklahoma did, and this time they just needed a field goal to win the game. And also their kicker's freaking incredible. And so
Yeah,
as soon as they got over midfield, I was like, oh boy, they need like 5 or 10 yards, and this guy can boot it.
sure.
So again, it's just one of those like what had to go wrong went wrong.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, we could. It's one of those where you can go back and look at about 8 different things and say, if this one thing changed, Kansas wins this game. If you don't
Yeah.
go down 10-0 to start off the game, you win this game. If you, score a touchdown on one of those red zone trips, you win this game. If you manage the clock a little bit, if you didn't play as off, if
Mhm.
Jason Bean didn't get hurt, all these different things, you can point to and say, man, if this went differently, then Kansas wins this game. But they didn't go differently, and Kansas didn't win the game.
Yep. And we could probably get into a broader conversation about this for, I guess, what it means for this season. But I think generally, right, in the new Big 12, there are going to be a lot of games like this where it
Yes.
is going to be decided by who does the best in the goal to go situation, who is able to capitalize off the other team's mistakes. And this is a learning experience for Kansas, I think. And this has been a season where we've seen so much progress, right? The defense has been better. Special teams has gone from like a D minus to like a C plus, I'd say, probably. Um, the offense has been what the offense has been, and this team is better.
Yeah.
And for the future, it looks healthier with some of the younger players that are coming through. Now, if we're looking ahead to next year, hey, what are the areas that you can get better at? I think it is in some of these tighter game situations. You think about Oklahoma, right? That fourth down play where Jason Bean fumbles. You think about, or sorry, Oklahoma State, where
Yep.
Jason Bean fumbles, or any one of the plays that led to KU losing against Oklahoma State. You think about this game. And getting in one score games is great, right? Because you're competitive. And on one given season, you can turn it into TCU, where you win every
Yep.
one score game and you go all the way to a playoff spot. Or 20, where you win the one score games and you blow out some teams and you go to the Big 12 title game. Like playing in one-score games is great. Being able to out-execute other teams in the one-score games is when you go from being a team that can win kind of your 7 to 8 to 9 games to winning your 10, 11, 12 games.
Yeah.
If you include if you include the bowl game and maybe a Big 12 title game in there too. So I think for me, this is kind of one of those games where KU will learn from it. Like, that's the thing about this staff, man. They learn from things and they continue to hammer away, and you see improvement on mistakes that were made earlier this season that really aren't being made now. So it's a learning chance, but one that obviously, like, in the moment, for the team it sucks because they were still in the Big 12 title hunt, and now it's out.
Yeah, that saying that you don't win or lose, you win or learn, is it's applicable, and
Yeah.
it's frustrating because looking at this year and how open the Big 12 is
Mm.
this year, and the fact that Kansas should have won in Stillwater, and the fact that Kansas should have won on Saturday, the Jayhawks could be sitting here right now in a spot where they have only the loss in
Mm.
Austin, and they're looking at, hey, we're going to get Texas in a rematch, here in a couple games,
Mm.
and heading into even the K-State game, feeling like, hey, that's going to be the case. Where even if you have two losses, maybe you get into the Big 12 title game, and so
Yeah.
it's a hard lesson to learn, certainly for them. But at the same time, like you said, it might be one of those things that in the long run, and I thought, something that I wanted to kind of bring up, which
Mhm.
was related to this game, but kind of big picture too. Lance Leipold's quote after the game, where he talked about them sort of skipping steps, right? Where
Mhm.
he said, "Hey, in order to get to where we're over here, we need to do A to B to C to D to E." And
Mhm.
he talked about how guys were trying to do things that were impossible because they were kind of skipping steps and things like that. I feel like that's a big part of the reason that I'm confident that this staff is going to continue to be successful is because it is so process
Mhm.
oriented, and it's not, well, hey guys, we've already got 7 wins. Like, this is already an unmitigated success. It's, look, like, the wins will come when we're doing the right things leading into those wins. And we can't go into Saturday saying, hey, this is going to be a win when you're not doing those other things. And so I thought that was a
Mhm.
really interesting quote that he had after that game.
And that would be a quote I would be seeking clarification on during the
Oh,
Monday press conference
oh,
because I
all
wanna
right,
know what the heck he's talking about. I mean, I have an idea, but
sure.
I wanna know, like, what exactly he is thinking that was not possible. Because also, right, this is a guy that has been saying, "Well, we need to, you know, change expectations here," right, and reset expectations. I think my question about what was it, getting recruited over last year sparked a response that was about that, right? We need to change the way people think. Well, hold on. If you want to change the way people think, and then all of a sudden you are technically in the Big 12 title race, and people start talking about that, that's how fans work, man. Like, that's how they're gonna
Oh,
look for best
sure.
case scenario, right? Why wouldn't
Well,
they?
and I wondered if he was almost talking about micro stuff, like you can't have a
Mm,
bad week of practice and then go in and expect to execute in games, or
and
you can't, skip this step
yeah,
and expect for it to play out on Saturday. And so I'm interested to hear his clarification on that too.
yeah, because I thought it was really interesting, right? And I think it was
Yeah.
um, it's just one of those comments that I'm like, oh, okay. Because and also he's not want to come out and like rip the team and do that. And I think the
No,
most important part about that quote is that at the end he says, "I take responsibility.
it's my fault. It's
It's
my
my
fault.
fault." And that
Yeah.
is the thing that Kansas football has missed for so long. It is that the person sitting at the press conference table too often was pointing over there or pointing over there, right? Oh, well, this guy didn't do this or this guy didn't do that or the
Got a bad
quarterback,
ref
well,
call, or yeah,
you know,
whatever else. Yeah.
and to sit up there after a game like that, and obviously it's probably a lot easier when it's not like Oklahoma State and you felt like you got jobbed and you can look and say, we did not execute well enough. And so I'm interested to see what he says. I want to get your take on Kansas State.
Okay.
What's your vibe check going into this one? And I'll add this, Kevin. Kansas practiced on Sunday. There's a 1% chance Jason Bean was able to practice.
Yeah.
Like Cole Ballard got the reps on Sunday.
Yep.
So knowing that, they'll take Monday off. They'll come back Tuesday. Tuesday, Wednesday are typically the big practice days. Knowing that, what's your vibe check heading into this weekend Sunflower Showdown?
Yeah, and I'm somebody that has picked at multiple points Kansas to beat Kansas State this year. And so,
Mm,
it's an interesting question on vibe check because obviously that's not how you wanted to enter this game. And I think that, without
mm,
placing blame, I'm not blaming him necessarily, but like it's hard to see an outcome where Cole Ballard is the quarterback and Kansas defeats Kansas State.
mm,
I think that the Jayhawks need to be really crisp to win this one. It was interesting. Oklahoma absolutely blew out West Virginia this weekend, and Brent Venables after the game was talking about West Virginia, was actually very complimentary, and he said, they won't give it to you. You
mm,
have to go out and you have to take it from them if you want to win the game. And Kansas State's kind of the ultimate example of that in the Big 12. They aren't usually going to beat themselves, right? You have to go out there and you have to wrestle the result away from them. And that means executing in the red zone. That means getting the little things right. It means not giving away huge plays on special teams the way that they have the last few years against Kansas State. And so I have a hard time seeing Kansas being crisp enough with Ballard at quarterback. And maybe that's unfair because like we talked about with Jason Bean in Texas, Cole Ballard didn't go into this week getting the number one reps to face Texas Tech.
yeah, I agree.
So, and
Mhm.
so there's a chance. I mean, there's more than a chance. Cole Ballard is better than what he showed on Saturday, is what I'm saying, because he didn't have a chance to prepare for it.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about, potentially getting all the reps,
Mhm.
mentally preparing for it, the coaches building an offensive game plan around what you do well, and that's all in there. There is more to Cole Ballard than what we saw, I think, on Saturday. Having said that, I still don't know that there's enough there
Mm,
to beat Kansas State. I almost think, you know, it would have to be either Jalen coming back and getting the practice reps or
mm.
whatever, or Jason Bean, potentially, not having a serious head injury and being in a situation where he's able to come back. Because let's be clear on this, Swain. The Jason Bean that beat Iowa State can beat Kansas State.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Jason Bean every week is, that guy that he's been at different times is always capable of beating Kansas State, but the one who was clutch, who didn't put the ball at risk, who made the plays he was asked to make, and that wasn't even a big running game for him. That was just, him being a crisp, experienced, poised passer of the football. That version of Jason Bean can beat Kansas State. And I think that's kind of what Kansas needs. They don't need
Mhm.
Jalen to put on his Houdini cape and come out and be one of the best players in the Big 12. And they don't need Jason Bean to be the guy that threw for 400 yards, against Oklahoma State before things kind of went south. They need that version of Jason Bean who, hey, it's a 3rd down and 9. I'm going to make the right read. The ball's going to go to the right place. It's not going to be put in danger. What do you think about
Yeah.
those two?
Well, I think you're right. Like Cole Ballard will be, if he's the one that gets the practice reps, he will be better. Which is also you're thinking, man, like he was kind of impressive in his time, and man, he can
Sure.
be better. Great. What is he going to change? The processing speed.
Yeah.
And I still think there were times in the game where you could see him like thinking through, okay, I've seen this. Okay, I've seen
Yeah.
this. And thinking through it. This K-State defense blitzes and they
Yeah.
send guys and they want to put pressure on the quarterback. And that for me is like my biggest worry, is that this is a game where Cole Ballard can get the best week of practice he's ever had. He could go in this game knowing the game plan like the back of his head, and the lack of in-game experience against a good Power 5 team like Kansas State is can still show itself.
Yeah,
And it can
sure.
still show itself in slow processing speed, not seeing everything correctly. And KU can make everything on one side of the field. They can make the reads really quick and easy for him. And still, there can be 2 moments in the game that he's slow, and those could be 2 interceptions, and it doesn't matter.
Yep.
So, and that for me is just the hard part, because I think you're right. Like, yeah, if Jason Bean was healthy, and let's say that Iowa State Bean had transferred over to this week against Texas Tech, and KU's able to win this game, and you're talking about, hey, man, Kansas won 3 straight games heading into the Sunflower Showdown. They've looked pretty good. The defense is on the right trend line going back to that second half against Oklahoma. You'd be thinking, hey, man, maybe this betting spread's like a pick 'em, right? Somewhere
Yep.
in there. And now you're looking at it's like 7.5, and it'll be 10 by the time the game starts, if I had to guess, if it is Cole Ballard starting. So it's one of those where it's a tough situation, right? Because I think in terms
Yep.
of the ability for Kansas to compete with Kansas State, this is the best team to be able to do it. Kansas
Yep.
is developed enough, right? On the defensive side of the ball, in the trenches, they are better. I think this Kansas State offensive line is better than what KU's faced the last 3 weeks, but still, I think this is a defense that will be able to get a couple of stops against K-State. I think this is still going to be a game that's going to score in the 20s or 30s, but this is a team that you feel like if it had its starting quarterback or its backup quarterback in Jason Bean, would have the ability to make this a 4-quarter game that goes down the stretch, and you're
Yep.
just looking for one play or one moment. And now I'm looking at this game and saying, hey, if it's Cole Ballard, you need a couple moments to go your way. And
Sure.
that's just kind of a lot to ask against a quarterback that has thrown, 1 interception in the last 4 games?
Yep.
It's kind of a lot to ask. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll be interested too. Is there any chance Devin Phillips gets back for this one, you think?
I think so. We'll
Because I
see.
mean, that would be a key too. Because
Mhm.
if Kansas can slow down, K-State's running game and make it to where they're a little bit more uncomfortable with what they're doing, I think there's a chance there too. Especially, this is going to sound weird, but if Cole Ballard is the quarterback, Kansas State might not be as aggressive on offense as it normally might be, because they might look at it and say, hey, we win this game if we don't make mistakes. And I think when you look at when KU played against Texas in Austin, I really feel like Texas, once they heard that it wasn't Jalen Daniels, they kind of turtle headed a little bit and said, hey, if we don't make too many mistakes, we're probably going to win this game. And so it'll be interesting to watch. I do think quarterback's gonna have a lot to say about this one way or the other. And so, if you're Kansas, you're really hoping for a quick run of health.
Yeah. You need the refresh button on the health, right?
Yeah,
All of
exactly,
a sudden.
exactly.
I will say it is senior day too. So
Yeah,
the game sold out. I'm really hoping it's a good crowd that shows up early,
yeah,
because this is a good senior class, man.
yeah,
Mason Fairchild's been around the block. Like, you want to talk about guys that have seen the dark days. Like, Mason Fairchild has seen it. Jason Bean deserves all the praise in the world. I really hope he is able to play for one last time
yeah,
at David Booth Kansas Memorial Stadium. You look at guys like Dominic Pooney, Mike Nowitzki, transfers that have been a big part in this offensive line, looking like one of the best offensive line Kansas has had in a long time. Like, I could go through the list, Kevin, but there are a lot of guys in this senior class that have had a big impact on this turnaround. And just as someone that likes these guys, seeing them every week and,
yeah.
and doing the media stuff and just off to this, like, they're good people. And you
I
hope
can't
that
imagine
they feel the love.
I can't imagine the emotion that Kenny Logan in particular will be
Yeah.
having on Saturday. I mean,
Hmm.
that's definitely one for all the different things that he's been through in his
Mm-hmm.
experience, and even in the Leipold era, like, he's been a little bit up and down and everything, and he's somebody he's been significantly better this year than he was last year. And for Kansas, for him to be kind of the face of the program and then kind of have the struggles he had last year to bounce back the way that he has
Yeah.
this year. I get the feeling we'll see a few tears shed from Kenny Logan on Saturday.
Maybe we'll see Leipold shed a tear for the first time.
We
That could
might.
be
We
an
might.
over under on DraftKings. How many
Oh
tears will be
yeah.
shed by Lance Leipold on Senior Day? Here, Kevin, I'll give you the rundown real quick, actually, because I can
Okay.
pull it up right here. So,
Uh-huh.
guys playing their last home games: Hayden Hatcher,
Yep.
Patrick Joyner, Devin Phillips. I think Craig Young is a big one that's been really important for KU. Quentin
Oh yeah.
Lassiter's had a great season. Kalon Gervin's been really impactful. Rich Miller and Kenny Logan are two guys that have been mainstays, right, of this defense.
Yeah.
And I think this defense is starting to get to the point where I don't know about outgrowing, but where you're seeing the elevated level year over year, where,
Yep.
Rich Miller was a standout his first year. And now you're saying he's a really important player mentally, but I think physically it just looks different than someone like JB Brown. You've got Jason Bean, you've got Dylan McDuffie, Nowitzki, Pooney, and then Mason Fairchild. Well, Kevin, that might be a good way to end it. My connection just blacked out for a second. So, any final thoughts on this game going into Senior Day? I think I cut out at Mason Fairchild. He's the last one.
No. I think it's a good group of seniors. Certainly one that's worthy of support and everything. And
Mm,
man, can you imagine the emotions on that field if that group of seniors is able to play a big role in breaking the streak to Kansas State? I mean, that would certainly be one heck of a party at the
yeah.
booth on Saturday.
They might take down both field goal posts.
Both field goal posts, yeah,
I mean,
yeah. It's
you're shutting down the booth, Kevin. Like that's the thing too,
that's
right?
that's true. That's true. I thought about that this past weekend, but I didn't think about that. With regard to K State, just in terms of I was talking to my dad about maybe getting
Mm,
season tickets, and I was like, of course, it's going to be really reduced capacity and everything, for next year. So I'm
good luck.
interested to see, yeah, what those season tickets will cost, how many are available, all those different things. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
this will be the last game at the old booth before the renovation process starts.
Favorite memory from your time in Memorial Stadium?
Oh gosh, this is going to sound really funny, because it's a good football memory, but also just a funny memory overall. I remember when Kansas broke the streak to Nebraska in '05. They had broken the streak to K-State the previous year, but the Nebraska one had actually that streak started when my dad was in college and went all the way through when I was done in college. And so in '05, they win it kind of pulling away in the fourth quarter or whatever. I think they won it like 40-15, something like that. And so everybody is going nuts. And Mark Simmons, wide receiver on that team, had made like I think a one-arm touchdown catch in that game. And I was kind of standing next to him as, everybody's flooding the field. And I'm going to guess it was a student. He ran over and offered him, he's like, "Yo, Mark Simmons, do you want some of my chili?" And he had like a bowl of chili. And
What?
Simmons was like caught up in the moment, like, man, this is really cool. And here's this dude offering him chili. And his response was just like, nah, dog, like I'm good. But just like as far as like favorite memories, ups, knocking off the streak to Nebraska
Mm.
in that fashion and having a fan so excited that he offered one of the players chili has to be up there on my list.
Kevin, all right, I turned 26 on Monday, and
Yeah.
I was 8 when that happened. So this is a little bit of a different time frame for my favorite memory. I think, for me, like last year, I
Yeah.
think seeing that TCU game and college game day, and like for me, I was on the sideline, I think an hour before, taking photos of recruits who were on campus, and to look up at the hill and to see it so full,
Yeah.
right, and just to see how packed it was, and you look at the sideline's packed with recruits, but even like the stands already had people filling into it an hour before the game, and that for me was kind of like a holy crap, like this is legit. Like this is what big college football feels like. And I got
Sure.
moments like that covering Iowa State, but it's just one of those you're like, "Oh wow, like this is legit." And so that for me was really cool. And then last year also seeing kind of guys like Jason Bean um, get emotional after the Oklahoma State win, and watching the field goal post come down after KU got bowl eligible. Those are two for me, because I think honestly my first,
Yeah.
5 years being around the stadium were David Beatty teams. So
Well,
not
I
necessarily
did.
a
I
whole lot
did.
of good stuff to go around there.
It wasn't as much a KU football memory, but in
Mm.
'07, actually, when KU beat Iowa State to go 11-0, getting before they were about to go to Arrowhead to play Missouri, I went after that game. I wrote my articles and stuff, and then went to the jewelry store and picked up an engagement ring and proposed to my now wife the next day. So it
Mhm.
was that was kind of a cool deal too. I mean, proposing to your wife while Kansas football is 11-0 is kind of a surreal experience, I think. And the proposal was not KU related or anything like that. My wife didn't go to KU, but it was just kind of a one of those times where you're just like, I can't believe,
Mhm.
that the Kansas is 11-0, ranked number 2 in the country, all of those different things. And hopefully, we get to cover another team like that, where they wind up having, that kind of run and being in the college football playoff, you know, discussion and all of those different things with 12 teams, Swain, and with the new look Big 12 and everything. You really never know. I mean, there's a very real chance, and I'm not trying to be hot takey or anything like that. There's a very real chance that Kansas gets there sometime in the next 5 to 10 years.
Hold on, I gotta clip that. I gotta clip that.
Good.
Hold on, hold
Clip
on.
it, put it up online.
It's gonna be on social
Kansas,
media really
that's the
quickly.
new headline. Kevin makes bold prediction.
Yeah, that'd be a good little. Yeah, someone will write that. Um, yeah, that's what I got. We went a little long here, but
Sure.
you got any more
We had
thoughts?
to end on a happy note after the subject of the game and everything. So
Just a little
we're
bit, just
hoping
a
if you
little bit.
stuck all the way through that you wound up with a smile on your face.
Yeah, maybe it'll be a different mood here on next Sunday too. We'll
Yeah,
see. We'll see what next week brings. But as always, thanks for listening to the Fog.net podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave a rating and review on iTunes. If you are watching this on the YouTube channel and you made it this far, like the video, subscribe to the channel. If honestly, if you made it this far and you're not subscribed to the channel, I mean, that's kind of impressive. You should be subscribed to the channel, and make sure you're dropping comments too. Those obviously go a long way in helping us with the algorithm. But for Kevin Flaherty, I'm Michael Swain. We'll talk to you all next week.